It was one of those grey mornings in Atlanta when the light outside seemed tired before the day even began. The streets buzzed with people chasing time, coffee in one hand, phone in the other, moving like parts of a machine that never stops. At the corner of Peachtree and 10th, the First Southern Bank stood tall, its glass walls reflecting a city that had grown used to rushing, worrying, and pretending. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper, sanitizer, and quiet tension. It was the kind of place where people whispered instead of talking, where the ticking clock above the teller station seemed louder than it should be. On that Tuesday morning, the bank looked ordinary. The usual customers filled the lobby, an old man filling out a withdrawal slip, a mother balancing her toddler on one hip while trying to deposit a check, a few professionals in suits impatiently scrolling through their phones. The employees behind the counter wore polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, the kind that came from hours of forced friendliness. Nothing about that morning suggested that anything unusual would happen. But sometimes, life cracks open in the most ordinary places. She walked in quietly, tall, calm, confident, carrying a small black purse and a folded check. Her name was Dana Williams, but no one in that bank knew that yet. She was dressed in a navy suit, her hair neatly pulled back, her movements precise but unhurried. She looked like someone who belonged anywhere she went. Nothing was threatening about her presence, yet the moment she approached the counter, the air seemed to shift, just slightly, almost unnoticeably. Behind the glass, the teller, a young woman named Kelly, looked up with her practiced smile. Dana greeted her politely and handed over the check. It was a large amount, nearly $10,000, drawn from the corporate account of a private security firm. Kelly glanced at it, nodded, and began typing into her computer. Nothing unusual. But after a few moments, her fingers slowed and her eyes narrowed. She checked the routing number again. Then the signature. Her expression changed, not by much, but enough. Dana noticed. "Is something wrong?" she asked, her voice calm. Kelly gave a tight smile. "Just a routine check, ma'am." But it wasn't routine. Kelly's stomach twisted. A week ago, the branch manager had warned staff about a string of counterfeit checks circulating through nearby banks. The details came rushing back to her. Large deposits, corporate names, forged signatures. She looked at Dana again. The woman didn't look like a scammer. But then again, who did? Kelly excused herself quietly and walked over to the branch manager's office, check in hand. From her glass office, the manager, Angela Carter, observed Dana through the transparent walls. There was something about her, composed, alert, but not nervous. Angela glanced at the check. "Call it in," she said under her breath. "We'll verify." Minutes passed. The hum of printers and quiet conversations filled the room, but Dana could feel the change in energy. People were whispering. A guard stood closer to the counter now. The teller avoided her eyes. Dana kept her expression neutral, though her patience was thinning. She had come straight from a late-night briefing, still wearing her badge under her blazer, still thinking about an ongoing case. She was supposed to be in another meeting in an hour, but now she was standing in a bank, waiting for strangers to decide whether to treat her like a criminal. Angela reappeared holding the check. "Ma'am, can I ask where you got this?" Dana looked at her evenly. "It's from my employer. It's a payroll check." Angela nodded slowly. "We're just having a bit of trouble verifying it. Do you have ID?" Dana reached into her purse and handed over her driver's license. Angela took it, but didn't seem convinced. She went back to her office again, whispered something to another employee, and picked up the phone. Dana watched, her jaw tightening slightly. Outside, the weather turned heavier. Clouds thickened, pressing down on the city like a warning. Inside, the mood matched the sky. When the police arrived, they didn't rush in. They walked with the deliberate calm of men used to authority, scanning the room with quiet suspicion. 2 officers, one older, one young, approached the counter. Kelly pointed them toward Dana, her face pale with uncertainty. "Ma'am," the older officer said, stepping closer, "we've had a report of a possible fraudulent check. Can we speak with you?" Dana blinked, disbelief flickering in her eyes. "You've got to be kidding." "It's just procedure," he said, though his tone carried a layer of assumption, one she knew all too well. The younger officer stood a few steps behind, his hand resting casually near his holster. The customers had gone quiet now, their conversations cut off mid-sentence. Everyone was watching. Dana straightened her shoulders. "You're making a mistake," she said. The officer nodded, his expression unreadable. "If everything checks out, we'll clear it up, but we need you to come with us." Her lips parted slightly. For a second she looked like she might argue, but then she exhaled and took a step back. She knew how these things worked. Arguing in public would only make things worse. Still, a part of her burned with anger, not just because of the accusation, but because she knew exactly why this wait is happening. The customers whispered. Some pulled out their phones. The security guard looked uneasy but didn't intervene. Kelly stood frozen behind the counter, regret flickering across her face. She hadn't wanted it to go this far. As the officers guided Dana toward the door, one of them reached for her arm. She stopped him with a look, sharp, cold, commanding. "Don't touch me," she said quietly. Something in her voice made him hesitate. They stepped outside into the humid morning. The sound of traffic filled the air, but to Dana it all blurred into a low hum. She had been in far more dangerous situations before, hostage rescues, undercover busts, but this felt different. This was personal. Inside the bank, the employees watched through the glass, their faces a mix of confusion and unease. Kelly bit her lip, wondering if she'd made the right call. Angela stood with her arms crossed, convincing herself she'd done her job. Outside, the officers led Dana toward the squad car. The older one opened the door. "You're not under arrest yet," he said, his tone careful, "but we have to take you in for questioning." Dana stared at him for a moment, then spoke in a calm, clipped voice. "You might want to check my ID again," she said. "Not the one in my wallet, the one in the badge holder inside my purse." He frowned. "What badge holder?" Dana's gaze didn't waver. "The one that says Federal Bureau of Investigation." The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp as glass. For a moment, no one spoke. The officer blinked, uncertain if he'd heard her right. Dana didn't move, didn't blink. She just stood there, waiting, her eyes steady and unafraid. The city kept moving around them, cars honking, people walking by, the world unaware that something small but seismic had just happened outside a quiet Atlanta bank. What had begun as an ordinary morning was about to turn into a storm that none of them would ever forget. The ride to the station was quiet, thick with tension. Dana sat in the back seat, her wrists free, but her patience thinning. She watched the city blur by, cars, trees, buildings, all of it feeling distant, unreal. The older officer, whose badge read Henderson, kept glancing at her in the rearview mirror. The younger one, Evans, looked nervous, like he'd realized this was no longer routine. Dana could see their unease building, and though she said nothing, her silence was louder than words. At the precinct, things moved fast at first. Forms, questions, the dull sound of a printer spitting out papers. Henderson asked her to wait in a small interview room. Dana sat down, folded her hands and stared at the wall. She didn't protest, not yet. She wanted to see how far they'd take it. The walls were pale grey, the kind of colour meant to calm people, but that only made you feel trapped. A camera blinked in the corner. The air smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant. Minutes turned into an hour. No one came in. Outside the room she could hear faint murmurs, her name being passed from one voice to another, confusion in every tone. She knew what was happening. They were calling the bank, checking the check, trying to confirm her story. What they didn't know yet was that she outranked almost everyone in that building. When Henderson finally returned, his expression had changed. He was holding her purse in one hand and her badge in the other. "Agent Williams," he began carefully, "there seems to be some misunderstanding." Dana looked at him, her expression flat. "You think?" He cleared his throat. "We were told the bank flagged a check that didn't clear verification protocols. Standard procedure, you know. But, you're FBI." "Correct," she said quietly. "Field Operations Division, Atlanta Bureau. And you've just detained a federal agent without probable cause." Evans shifted uncomfortably by the door. Henderson looked down at the badge again, as if hoping it might disappear. "Look, Agent Williams, it was an honest mistake. We were just following up on a call." She leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but sharp. "A call that was made because a black woman tried to deposit her paycheck. Tell me, officer, did anyone at that bank mention my behavior? Did I raise my voice? Threaten anyone? Or was the only suspicious thing about me the color of my skin and the size of that check?" Silence. Henderson didn't answer. Her tone softened, but the edge in her eyes didn't fade. "You've got no idea how many times this happens," she said quietly. "And you wonder why people stop trusting you." For a moment the air in the room felt heavy, almost suffocating. Henderson nodded awkwardly and excused himself, mumbling something about paperwork. Evans followed, his eyes full of regret. When she was finally cleared to leave, Dana didn't celebrate or shout. She just took her purse, checked that her badge and check were still inside, and walked out. But something inside her had shifted. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a deep, simmering realization. This wasn't about her personally. It was about what people saw when they looked at her, and what they refused to see. Outside, rain had started to fall. She stood under the grey sky for a long moment, breathing it in. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. "This is Agent Williams. I need to file an internal incident report," she said. "Possible civil rights violation involving local law enforcement and a commercial institution." Her voice was steady, professional, but beneath it ran an undercurrent of quiet rage. The report spread quickly. By the end of the day, her supervisors knew. By the next morning, so did the media division. But what Dana didn't realize was that the story would escape her control. That night, a bank employee, someone young and frustrated, posted about the incident on social media. "Woman tries to cash fake check. Turns out she's FBI," the post read, followed by a few laughing emojis. It was meant as gossip, but the internet turned it into fire. Within hours, the story went viral, though twisted, exaggerated, and stripped of context. Half the commenters were mocking the police. The other half were questioning Dana's legitimacy. Dana sat in her apartment later that night, scrolling through her phone, watching the chaos unfold. Her face had been blurred in most posts, but her story was everywhere. FBI agent arrested over fake check scandal. Racial profiling or security protocol. News anchors debated her life like it were entertainment. Her phone buzzed non-stop. Calls from her office, from legal advisors, even from friends she hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone wanted to know what had really happened. But behind all of that noise, something darker stirred. Fear, humiliation, anger that felt bone deep. At the same time, the bank was in panic mode. Angela Carter, the branch manager, couldn't sleep. Her boss had called her 3 times, demanding an explanation. The corporate office was breathing down her neck. Kelly, the teller, was crying in her car after work, replaying the moment she made the call. She told herself she'd only followed procedure, but deep down she couldn't shake the image of Dana's calm, proud face as she was led away. Angela, however, wasn't ready to accept blame. She convinced herself she'd done everything right. "If the check looked fake, it's my duty to report it," she told anyone who would listen. I didn't know she was FBI. But at home, she was unraveling. Her husband noticed how she sat up at night, staring at the ceiling, her mind somewhere else. She kept refreshing news articles, dreading what might come next. The tension wasn't just between Dana and the police now, it was spreading. Federal oversight got involved. Lawyers started circling the case. The FBI wanted to protect one of their own, but they also wanted to avoid a public scandal. Dana's superiors called her in for a meeting 2 days later, telling her to stay calm, stay quiet, and let the Bureau handle it. She tried to follow orders, but she couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. How easily her authority, her years of service, had meant nothing in that moment. She thought about how the officers had looked at her, how the teller had hesitated to meet her eyes. She replayed the humiliation again and again until it hardened into something colder than anger. Meanwhile, local reporters dug deeper. They discovered that Dana had worked undercover on several racial bias investigations in the past. Some even suggested that she had a history of calling out discrimination within the Bureau. Suddenly her case wasn't just about a bank mistake. It became political. She was portrayed either as a symbol of systemic injustice or as an overreacting government employee looking for attention. The public tension grew. Protesters began showing up outside the bank, demanding accountability. Angela's branch became a target of online hate. Customers cancelled accounts. Threatening messages filled her inbox. She tried to stay composed at work, but her staff could see her cracking. Kelly begged to transfer. The atmosphere in the branch turned cold, paranoid, almost hostile. Henderson, too, couldn't shake what happened. His reputation took a hit. The department suspended him temporarily pending review. He spent his days pacing his living room, flipping between guilt and bitterness. "I didn't mean to," he muttered to his wife one night. "She looks suspicious. Anyone would have done the same." But deep down, even he didn't believe that. For Dana, the following weeks became a blur of interviews, investigations, and unwanted attention. Her apartment felt smaller with every passing day. Reporters camped outside. Her phone buzzed at all hours. Every time she stepped outside, she could feel eyes on her. And though she tried to stay strong, something inside her was breaking. She wasn't just fighting for herself now. She was fighting the image the world had decided for her. She stopped sleeping. The sound of sirens made her flinch. She'd see uniformed officers on the street and feel her chest tighten, remembering the touch of cold suspicion in their eyes. Sometimes she'd dream of that bank lobby, of Kelly's nervous face, of Angela whispering through the glass, of the word fraudulent echoing in her head until it turned into something else, unworthy. One night, after another long day of meetings, Dana poured herself a glass of water and sat in silence. Her apartment was dark, the city glowing faintly outside her window. She looked at her badge on the table, the small piece of metal that was supposed to protect her from exactly what had happened. For the first time in her life, she felt powerless. At the same time, Angela was losing her grip. She'd received a formal notice from corporate about her role in the incident. Rumors spread that she might be transferred or even fired. Her anxiety grew into anger at the system, at the public, at Dana. She could have just explained herself, she snapped to her husband one evening. Instead, she ruined my life, but it wasn't true, and deep down she knew it. The guilt was eating her alive. She started drinking after work just to quiet her thoughts. She avoided mirrors because every time she saw her reflection, she saw Dana's calm eyes staring back. Across town, Henderson met with his union rep, fighting to keep his job. "It wasn't racism," he said again and again. "It was a mistake." But the word mistake didn't feel strong enough anymore. His name had been dragged through the press. The department wanted someone to blame, and he was the easiest target. The city itself seemed to hold its breath. People argued about the case in cafes, online, and living rooms. Some saw Dana as a victim of systemic bias. Others thought she was exploiting the situation. But under all that noise, under the opinions and hashtags, were three people, Dana, Angela, and Henderson, each caught in a spiral they couldn't escape. The tension that had started in a quiet bank lobby had grown into something much bigger, something none of them could control. And as the pressure built from every side, legal, personal, emotional, it was clear that something was going to give. None of them would come out of it the same. The storm broke on a Thursday night. The city had been restless for weeks, torn between anger and exhaustion. The case had gone national. Cameras lined up outside the bank every morning. Protesters shouted at employees. News vans followed Dana to work, her face now public property. Everyone wanted a reaction. Everyone wanted something to blame. That evening, rain fell hard, washing the city in streaks of light and shadow. The First Southern Bank had closed early that day. Too many threats, too much tension. Inside, only a few employees remained, finishing reports and counting drawers. Angela sat in her office, her hands trembling as she scrolled through yet another email from corporate. Pending termination. Those words glared back at her in bold letters. She hadn't slept in days. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes hollow. Every time she closed them, she saw that moment again, the woman at the counter, calm and confident, and the slow realization that everything that followed had been her fault. But guilt had long turned into something else. It had hardened into resentment. Dana Williams had destroyed her career, her peace, her marriage. That's how she saw it now. Across town, Dana was sitting in her car, parked a few blocks away from the same bank. The rain tapped against her windshield, steady and cold. She hadn't planned to come here, not consciously. She told herself she just wanted closure, to see it one last time before she moved on. But deep down, she knew she wasn't ready to let it go. The Bureau had wrapped up its investigation, called it an unfortunate misunderstanding. The department that arrested her had issued a public apology, but none of it changed what she felt inside, that nothing had really been made right. Her phone buzzed with another message from her supervisor. "Media still hounding us. Please avoid further public appearances." She turned it off and tossed it aside. For weeks, she'd followed the rules, stayed silent, trusted the system. And what had it brought her? Smears, speculation, and strangers debating her existence. The rain grew heavier, blurring the streetlights into pale halos. Dana exhaled slowly, then opened her door. Inside the bank, Angela jumped at the sound of the front door opening. "We're closed!" she called out, her voice sharp, tired. Dana stepped into the dim lobby, water dripping from her coat. "I know," she said quietly. Angela froze. The voice was unmistakable. Slowly she stood up, her pulse quickening. "You! What are you doing here?" "I needed to talk," Dana said. Her tone wasn't angry, but there was something cold beneath it, something final. Angela's eyes darted to the door, then back to Dana. "You can't just come in here like this, we're closed." "I won't be long." Dana stepped closer, her shoes clicking against the marble floor. "You ruined me, Ms. Carter. You called the police without a second thought. You humiliated me in front of everyone. And for what? A hunch." Angela swallowed hard. "I was following policy." "Policy?" Dana repeated, almost whispering the word. "That's what they all say." The lights flickered in the storm outside. The sound of thunder rolled through the building, deep and distant. The two women stood facing each other in the faint glow of the security lights, one trembling with guilt and fear, the other calm, but burning inside. "You think I wanted any of this?" Angela said, her voice breaking. "I lost everything too. My job, my marriage, my reputation. You think you're the only one who suffered?" Dana's jaw tightened. The difference is, you caused it. I just lived through it. Angela's hands shook. You don't understand. Everyone was watching. The systems flagged your check. What was I supposed to do? Use common sense, Dana said. Use humanity. For a moment, neither spoke. The only sound was the rain hammering against the windows. Angela's breathing quickened. The pressure of the past weeks, the news, the threats, the guilt, boiled over. You came here to blame me, she said, her voice cracking. But I'm not your enemy. Dana took a slow step forward. Aren't you? Angela backed away, her hand brushing the desk behind her. A drawer was slightly open. She reached inside, fingers trembling. She hadn't even realized she was doing it until she felt the cold weight of the small handgun the bank kept for emergencies. Her husband had begged her to start carrying it after the threats began. She'd told herself it was just for protection. When she pulled it out, her hands shook so violently that the barrel wavered in the air. Dana froze. Her training kicked in instantly, body still, voice steady. Angela, put it down. Don't come closer. Angela's voice was shrill now, panicked. You've already destroyed everything. I won't let you do more. I'm not here to hurt you, Dana said calmly, raising her hand slightly. You're scared. I get that. But this isn't how you fix it. Angela's finger twitched near the trigger. Her vision blurred with tears. You have no idea what it's been like. Everyone hates me. They call me racist, a monster. I can't even walk into a store without someone whispering. And whose fault is that? Dana asked, her voice tightening. Mine? Or yours? Angela sobbed. You don't understand. Then make me understand, Dana said. Put the gun down and talk to me. For a split second, the air between them was painfully still. Then a flash of lightning filled the room, and in that flicker of light, Angela saw Dana move, just slightly, a reflexive step forward. Her fear took over before reason could. The gun went off. The sound was deafening, shattering through the empty bank. Angela's ears rang, her vision blanked. Dana stumbled back, shock crossing her face. She pressed a hand to her side, where dark red was already blooming through her shirt. Her knees buckled, and she fell against the counter, sliding slowly to the floor. Angela froze, the gun still raised, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Oh my God! Oh my God! The silence after the gunshot was unbearable. The storm outside raged, but inside, it felt like the world had stopped. Angela dropped the gun. It clattered to the floor, echoing in the empty lobby. She stumbled toward Dana, her shoes slipping on the marble. No, 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 she whispered, crouching beside her. Dana was still conscious, her eyes glassy but focused. She looked up at Angela, pain flashing across her face, but she didn't scream. She just breathed, shallow, slow. You shot an FBI agent, she said weakly. Angela's heart pounded in her chest. It was an accident, she cried. You moved. I didn't mean to. I swear. Dana coughed, the sound wet, painful. You always say that. Angela pressed her hands against the wound, her own fingers slick with blood. Stay with me. Please. But Dana's eyes were already fading. Her body trembled once, then went still. Angela's sobs filled the room. She looked around wildly, as if expecting someone to walk in to fix what she'd done. Her mind raced through excuses, self-defense, fear, mistake, but none of them sounded real anymore. She picked up the gun again, shaking so hard she could barely hold it. Then throw. The ringing in her ears, she heard the faint hum of the bank's security system. A red light blinked on the wall. The cameras were recording. The entire thing had been captured. She dropped the weapon and backed away, clutching her face. No, no, no. Her voice cracked into a scream that echoed through the building. Outside, the storm swallowed the sound. The first police car arrived 15 minutes later, responding to a triggered, silent alarm. The officers broke through the glass doors, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. What they found was chaos. Blood smeared across the marble, papers scattered, and a woman kneeling beside the lifeless body of another, rocking back and forth, whispering apologies to no one. Henderson was one of the first on the scene. When he saw who was lying on the floor, his knees nearly gave out. "Oh God," he muttered, kneeling beside her. Dana's badge lay beside her hand, smeared with blood. Angela didn't resist when they cuffed her. She didn't even speak. She just stared at her shaking hands, whispering over and over. "It was an accident. She moved. I didn't mean to." The paramedics arrived too late. The blood loss had been too fast. The bullet had torn through her side, hitting a major artery. Dana Williams, the woman once accused of fraud, was now dead inside the same bank where it all began. Outside, the storm began to fade, leaving the city drenched and silent. Henderson stood under the flashing lights, his uniform soaked, watching the medics cover Dana's body. He thought about that day in the station, the way she'd looked at him, disappointed, angry, human. And now she was gone. Angela was led away in handcuffs, her face pale, her eyes empty. She didn't struggle. She didn't cry anymore. Somewhere inside her, the fear had turned to numbness. She'd crossed a line she could never return from. Inside the bank, the lights flickered again before finally going out, leaving behind only the hum of rain and the faint echo of a single gunshot, a sound that would haunt every person in that building for the rest of their lives. The night after the crime, Black Hollow fell into a silence that was more terrible than the screams that had filled it only hours before. The once grand hall stood in eerie stillness as flashing blue lights from police cars painted the walls in cold, shifting colors. Officers moved carefully through the blood-stained floors, marking evidence and whispering to each other. The 7 women who remained were scattered around the manor, each lost in her own nightmare. Lydia sat motionless on the staircase, her hands trembling, whispering over and over, "It wasn't supposed to end this way." Eleanor clutched her rosary, muttering prayers through tears, while Clara stumbled into the garden, vomiting as the metallic scent of blood clung to her clothes. Servants, terrified and confused, gave conflicting statements. Some claimed it was self-defense, others whispered of a plan gone terribly wrong. The house itself seemed to groan under the weight of their guilt, as if aware of what had taken place within its walls. In the days that followed, denial became the first refuge for them all. Lydia tried to convince herself that what happened was never intended, that she had only wanted to confront, not destroy. Clara refused to accept any blame, turning her anger toward Lydia and saying she had been manipulated. Eleanor, her faith shattered, rationalized the act as divine justice, punishment for years of lies and deceit within their family. Yet as to Pyatt, me passed, guilt crept in like a slow poison. Each woman began to see flashes of the crime in her dreams, the screaming, the blood, the moment the line between anger and murder had vanished. They grew paranoid, afraid of shadows, footsteps, and whispers that might not have existed. The bond that once tied them as sisters and confidants fractured entirely, replaced by suspicion and resentment. They turned against one another, desperate to shift blame, to find one person to carry the sin for them all. The investigation that followed was relentless. Detectives quickly uncovered inconsistencies in their stories, and what began as a tragedy looked more like a conspiracy. Forensic evidence revealed the crime scene had been staged. Objects moved, blood wiped, lies hidden in plain sight. The media swarmed the estate, dubbing the case the 7 Sisters of Black Hollow. Once known for their charm and wealth, the women were now painted as monsters. The public demanded justice. Lydia, being the most intelligent and calculating, became the focal point of the case. The court portrayed her as both manipulator and victim, a woman consumed by envy and control. Eleanor's testimony wavered between confession and denial. She spoke of divine wrath, as if God himself had guided their hands. Clara, unstable and trembling, cried out in the courtroom, "The house made us do it." Her words fueled the tabloid's obsession, adding supernatural intrigue to human tragedy. The trial turned into a public spectacle, a stage where wealth, womanhood, and madness intertwined. Behind the courtroom drama, the emotional and psychological toll was unbearable. Lydia began to deteriorate in prison, filling her journal with erratic handwriting and disturbing thoughts about voices in the walls and mirrors that wouldn't reflect her face properly. Eleanor withdrew into silence, convinced that their family was cursed, doomed to repeat the same sins generation after generation. Clara was placed under psychiatric care after multiple breakdowns. She often stared into empty corners, whispering to someone unseen, convinced that the spirit of the victim lingered in the shadows. The younger women of the family, who once idolized their elders, grew to hate them, blaming their ruin on pride and obsession. Beyond the family, the town itself changed. Neighbors avoided the manor, speaking of eerie lights and sounds at night. Churches held vigils, yet even priests whispered that divine punishment had already been delivered. Public perception transformed the 7 women from respected social figures into cautionary legends. Before the crime, their name carried weight, wealth, class, and influence. Afterward, it was synonymous with corruption and decay. Old acquaintances erased their connections, charities removed their donations, and newspapers described them as the cursed women of Black Hollow. Some sympathetic voices argued that they had been victims of their own environment, years of patriarchal control and emotional repression that eventually exploded into violence. But most saw only scandal. Their mansion became a local attraction for thrill-seekers and ghost hunters, a symbol of pride turned to ruin. The once bright estate was now cordoned off, its windows shattered, its walls slowly collapsing under time and weather. Locals claimed to see faint lights in the windows at night, even though the electricity had long been cut. The place felt alive, watching, Remies, beering. The scent of decay, old perfume and mold hung in the air, as if the house itself still mourned. The ripple effects reached far beyond the 7 women. Relatives quietly changed their surnames, pretending to have no relation. The next generation grew up with half-told stories, warned never to ask about what happened at the house. Friends who once visited remembered strange moments, sudden outbursts, tense silences, and dark looks exchanged between sisters that now made tragic sense. The entire community was scarred, speaking of Black Hollow in hushed tones, using it as a warning about unchecked anger and hidden sins. The story of the 7 women became not just a crime, but a moral lesson, a tale of what happens when silence, pride, and resentment fester for too long. In the end, when all trials were over and sentences served, only a few of the women remained alive. Eleanor, frail and hollow-eyed, returned years later to the ruins of the house. The garden was overgrown, the fountain dry and the walls covered in ivy. She knelt on the cracked stone path and whispered into the silence, "We were all guilty, even before that night." Her words carried the weight of generations, acknowledging that the crime was not a single act, but the final result of everything they had hidden and denied. The story closed not with redemption, but with quiet understanding that true horror lies not in the act itself, but in the years of silence that allowed it to happen. The tone of this aftermath is somber and reflective. The chaos of violence gives way to the heavy stillness of guilt. Justice may have been served, but it offers no peace. Every character is left hollowed by what they've done and what they've lost. The tragedy of the House of 7 Women becomes a meditation on the cost of secrets, the destruction of pride, and the way love, when twisted by envy and silence, can become something monstrous. Months after the shocking arrest, the echoes of that day still lingered in every corner of Detroit. The story had spread beyond state lines, replayed endlessly on social media and nightly news shows, dissected by experts and debated by strangers who felt entitled to have an opinion. The footage of her, Agent Naomi Brooks, being handcuffed outside the glass doors of Midtown Savings Bank had been seen by millions. Her calm voice, asking over and over, "Can I explain? I work for the Bureau," had been drowned out by the noise of accusation, suspicion, and disbelief. Now, long after the headlines faded, the real consequences began to unfold, quietly, painfully, and inescapably. Naomi sat alone in her apartment months later, her badge still sitting on the table where she had placed it the night she was suspended pending review. She had spent over 10 years building her career, working through the ranks, sacrificing weekends, and keeping her personal life locked away so she could prove herself in a system that had never made room easily for women like her. And yet, in a single moment, inside that bright, sterile bank lobby, everything she stood for had been questioned, reduced to suspicion because of her skin color. The Bureau's internal investigation cleared her of wrongdoing, of course, but it didn't erase the humiliation, the trauma, or the public silence that followed. Even after reinstatement, Naomi noticed the shift in how people looked at her. Some offered sympathy, others avoided her altogether, unsure whether she was a symbol of justice or a reminder of its failure. The officers who arrested her faced disciplinary hearings and public scrutiny. Officer Reed, the one who had first demanded she prove her identity, was suspended without pay and later reassigned to a desk job. His partner, Officer Dunn, resigned quietly after a video leaked showing him laughing about the arrest at a bar. The bank teller who had called 911, a young woman named Heather, issued a public apology, though many doubted its sincerity. She claimed she had just followed procedure, but the internet had already branded her as a symbol of modern-day prejudice disguised as policy. The bank faced lawsuits and public boycotts. Corporate spokespeople appeared on television promising diversity training and policy reforms, but everyone knew it was damage control. The trust was gone. For many in the city, Midtown Savings became a warning, a reminder of how fragile dignity could be when filtered through fear and bias. Justice, if it could be called that, came unevenly. Naomi won her civil case, and the settlement made headlines, but the money didn't heal anything. She didn't smile when she saw the check, nor when her lawyer congratulated her. What she had wanted, an acknowledgement of humanity, couldn't be bought or written into a court ruling. Still, she accepted it, using a portion to start a community foundation for young women of color who aspired to careers in law enforcement. It was her way of reclaiming purpose from the chaos, even if it came from a wound that might never close. In interviews, she spoke carefully, never with anger but with quiet intensity. "It's not about one mistake," she said once. "It's about how easy it was for everyone to believe that someone like me didn't belong." Those words struck deeper than any headline. For the city, the case became a mirror held up to its own conscience. Rallies were held outside police precincts and courthouses, not only in Detroit, but across the country. Protesters carried signs that read, "Her job was to protect you. You arrested her instead." Social media fueled the fire, but beneath the outrage was something deeper, an exhaustion that came from recognizing how many times the same story had already been told. Yet Naomi's case felt different. It wasn't just about police misconduct. It was about how systems built on fear and bias could unravel trust even among those sworn to uphold it. In the following months, police departments quietly reviewed their training manuals, adjusting their language, introducing identity verification procedures meant to prevent similar incidents. Politicians made speeches promising reform, but for every promise, there was cynicism. "It'll happen again," one activist told a reporter. "Maybe not tomorrow, but soon. Because the problem isn't policy, it's perception." That sentence lingered long after the news crews left. Naomi's personal life also bore the marks of that day. Friends she thought she could rely on disappeared when the controversy exploded, fearing association. Her relationship with her parents changed too. Her mother, once proud of her daughter's badge, now looked at it with quiet resentment. "You shouldn't have to prove who you are to anyone," she told Naomi one night over dinner. "Not after everything you've done for this country." Naomi didn't answer. She couldn't. Because even though she agreed, she also knew that her silence, the same silence that helped her survive in the bureau, was part of the reason the problem persisted. She had spent years swallowing small injustices, believing that professionalism could outshine prejudice. That day at the bank shattered that illusion. As time passed, Naomi became Mose, than just a name in a headline. Universities invited her to speak. Young cadets asked for her advice. Her story became a case study in law schools and diversity workshops. Some called her a hero, others a victim. But Naomi rejected both labels. "I'm just a person who walked into a bank," she said simply during one interview. And that should have been enough. Her quiet dignity, more than anything, forced people to confront what they'd rather ignore: the subtle, everyday cruelty of assumption. By the end of the year, the officers who had once dismissed her now found their names mentioned with regret and scorn. Officer Reed, in a private interview months later, admitted that when he first saw her, "I didn't see an agent. I saw what I was trained to see as suspicious." His words became another uncomfortable truth in a growing pile of evidence that the system wasn't broken. It was working exactly as it was built. Naomi, hearing his statement, felt no satisfaction, just fatigue. "He's not the first," she told a friend quietly, "and he won't be the last." In a broader sense, Naomi's story became a lens through which society examined itself. It exposed how power operates not only through laws and weapons, but through perception. How authority can shift instantly based on race, gender, or class. It forced the question, who gets believed and who gets doubted? It revealed how deeply rooted biases are, not always in hatred, but in fear disguised as caution, in systems designed to protect but often used to control. The moral complexity of her case also blurred traditional lines of justice. The officers didn't set out to ruin a life. They acted out of ingrained prejudice and institutional habits. Naomi's arrest wasn't a deliberate act of cruelty. It was a reflection of something even more dangerous: indifference. The kind that doesn't shout or curse, but quietly assumes guilt without to reason. That realization haunted many who followed the case. In the end, Naomi returned to her work at the bureau, though she was never the same. Her confidence, once unshakable, had been replaced by something harder, quieter. She no longer smiled as easily and believed in the neat lines between good and bad. Her colleagues noticed the change, though few understood it. She kept her distance, focused on her cases, and when she looked in the mirror, she saw not a symbol or a survivor, but simply a woman who had seen the truth of the system she once believed in. Justice had been served in the eyes of the law, but the real verdict was written elsewhere, in the hearts of everyone who saw that video and realized how fragile fairness can be. The case faded from the news cycle, replaced by newer scandals, but for Naomi, it never really ended. It lived in the stares she still received when walking into certain rooms, in the hesitation she felt each time she handed over her ID, in the quiet knowledge that her story wasn't just hers, it belonged to a much larger history of injustice. And so, the story closed not with triumph, but reflection. Naomi's ordeal reminded the world that morality is not always clear, and justice is rarely complete. It showed that power, when unchecked, can humiliate even those sworn to wield it responsibly. And it asked one last, haunting question that still echoes long after the headlines are gone. How many more must prove who they are before the world finally believes them?